The restaurant was buzzing with noise. Plates clattered, people laughed, and waiters moved quickly from table to table. Among them was a young server who had worked there for a few years. He was quiet, careful, and always made sure the guests were happy. Despite all the work he did, most people only saw him as someone who took orders and carried trays. They didn't know much about him, and that was fine because he liked keeping his personal life private. But there was one thing he loved more than anything, one thing that made him feel alive: playing the piano. Ever since he was a child, he had been drawn to music. He remembered the old piano in his small house, worn out and a little out of tune. He would sit there for hours, fingers moving across the keys, creating melodies that made him forget everything else. No one in his family cared much about music. They thought it was just a hobby, something that wouldn't help him in life. But he didn't care. Music was his escape, his comfort, and sometimes the only thing that made him feel truly happy. As he grew older, life became busier. School, chores, and then work took most of his time. The piano became something he could only play in secret. He would practice late at night when the house was quiet, or early in the morning before anyone woke up. Each note he played reminded him that there was more to him than serving tables and pouring drinks. It reminded him that he had a gift, even if nobody else saw it. The restaurant was hosting a local talent night that evening. Posters were up everywhere and people had started talking about it. Everyone who worked there knew about it, including him. He watched as other servers and even some of the guests mentioned the talent night, joking about who might perform. Some of the co-workers laughed and said things that made him feel small. They didn't mean to be cruel, but their words carried a tone of judgment. "You should stick to serving, that's your talent," one of them said with a smirk. Another laughed and added, "I don't think the piano is for everyone. Some people just aren't meant to play." He smiled politely, not saying anything. Inside, his heart ached a little. He knew he could play, and he knew the music that lived in him could move people. But he had learned long ago that sharing that side of himself came with risk. People were quick to judge, quick to laugh, and quick to doubt. Yet, even as they joked, a small fire grew inside him. A part of him wanted to show them, to prove that there was more to him than they realized. The night of the talent show arrived. The restaurant had been rearranged. Tables were pushed aside to make space for a small stage in the corner. Lights were dimmed, and a few decorations were hung to make the room feel festive. Guests started arriving, chatting excitedly about the performers. Some were children who couldn't wait to see the acts. Others were regulars who came to watch and enjoy the entertainment. Everyone seemed excited, except for him. He felt nervous, his palms sweating slightly as he wiped them on his apron. He walked past the stage, glancing at the piano that had been set up for the performances. It was an old piano, polished but showing its age. He ran his fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar grooves under his touch. His heart leapt at the contact. He could feel the music calling him, asking him to come alive once more. But he stopped. The voices of his co-workers echoed in his mind. What if he tried and failed? What if everyone laughed at him? He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. He had always dreamed of moments like this, but fear had always held him back. As the show started, he watched from a distance. People clapped politely for each performer. Some were talented, some were not. Each time someone finished, the audience cheered and moved on. He felt a mix of admiration and sadness. Admiration for those brave enough to perform and sadness because he wanted to be up there too. He wanted to feel the applause, the connection that only music could bring. But he stayed back, quietly, hiding behind his uniform and his tray of dishes, hoping nobody noticed his longing eyes. During a short break, one of the organizers walked around, looking for anyone who might still want to perform. He didn't think much of it at first, but then she called out his name. His heart stopped. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Would you like to play the piano?" she asked, smiling warmly. The question felt both terrifying and thrilling. All eyes were now on him, some curious, some skeptical. He hesitated, looking down at his hands. Could he really do it? Could he stand up there in front of everyone who had doubted him and play? A few co-workers whispered behind him, some snickering. "This is going to be a disaster," one muttered. Another shrugged. "I guess we'll see if he's any good." Their words stung, but they also pushed him forward in a strange way. He remembered the nights spent practicing, the melodies that had filled his small room, and the joy he had felt while playing alone. He took a deep breath, nodded and said, "I'll do it." As he walked to the stage, every step felt heavy yet liberating. The room seemed louder, the chatter fading into the background as he approached the piano. He sat down, his fingers hovering above the keys. He could feel the heat of the lights on his face, the eyes of the audience studying him. For a moment, fear gripped him, and he thought of running back to the safety of the kitchen. But then he closed his eyes, remembering the first time he had ever played a melody on that old piano at home. That memory gave him courage. He pressed the first key, a soft note that trembled slightly but filled the room with sound. He kept going, one note flowing into another, and something magical began to happen. The audience leaned in, surprised by the emotion in the music. Even those who had doubted him could not look away. The nervousness inside him began to fade, replaced by a growing confidence. Every note told a story, every chord carried emotion. He was no longer just a server. He was a musician, a storyteller, a soul speaking through music. And in that moment he realized something important. It didn't matter what others thought. What mattered was the music, the connection, and the truth of who he was. As he played, he felt free, alive, and completely himself for the first time in a long time. The restaurant, the crowd, and even the whispers of doubt faded away. All that existed was the music and the feeling that he belonged in that moment. The part of him that had always been shamed and underestimated now felt powerful in a quiet, beautiful way. He had stepped into the spotlight not because he wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because he wanted to honor the gift he had kept hidden for so long. And even if the performance ended in silence or laughter, he knew deep inside that this was his moment, and nobody could take it away from him. The restaurant was alive with excitement. The lights were slightly dimmed, creating a warm glow over the small stage. Guests leaned forward in their seats, drinks in hand, waiting for the next performer. The young server, who had always stayed in the background, now found himself at the center of attention. His heart raced, and his palms were clammy, but he tried to keep calm. This was his chance, a moment he had secretly dreamed of for years. He walked slowly toward the piano, each step echoing faintly on the wooden floor. Some people whispered to each other, curious about who would play next. Others laughed softly, remembering the jokes about him from earlier. The young server ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on the smooth surface of the piano keys. They looked familiar yet intimidating in the bright stage lights. His fingers itched to move, to touch them and release the music that had been waiting inside him. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted the bench and sat down. He could feel the weight of all eyes on him, the skepticism of those who had laughed earlier. He thought of the long nights spent practicing in secret, the melodies he had created when no one was listening. That was the part of him that nobody knew about, the side that could make people feel something with just the touch of his fingers. He had kept it hidden, fearing ridicule, but now it was time. He had to play not for them but for himself. He placed his fingers lightly on the keys, feeling the smooth texture beneath his touch. The first note he played was soft, almost tentative. The audience shifted in their seats, some leaning closer, curious about what would come next. He took another deep breath and continued, letting the music flow naturally. The notes intertwined, rising and falling in a gentle melody that seemed to capture the attention of everyone in the room. The nervousness began to fade as he lost himself in the music. With each passing moment, he felt more confident. His fingers moved faster, gliding over the keys with ease. The melody grew richer, more complex, but he handled it with grace. He noticed the expressions of surprise on the faces of some guests. Whispers of admiration began to spread, replacing the earlier skepticism. People who had doubted him were now watching closely, unable to look away. The young server felt a mix of relief and joy. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to show that he was more than just a server. As he continued to play, He remembered the reason he had started music in the first place. It was not about fame or recognition. It was about expressing himself, about sharing the emotions he carried inside. The music was his voice, louder and clearer than any words could ever be. He thought about the first time he had played the old piano at home, the sense of freedom it had given him. That feeling returned now, stronger than ever. He was no longer worried about judgment or laughter. He was immersed in the music, and nothing else mattered. The audience began to respond to the performance. Hands clapped along with the rhythm, and a few people even whispered in awe. The young server noticed that some of the children in the crowd were smiling widely, captivated by the melody. For a moment, he felt a connection with everyone in the room, a shared experience that transcended words. It was as if the music had created a bridge between him and the audience, allowing them to see a part of him they had never known existed. He decided to take a risk. There was a complex section of the piece that he had practiced many times but had never played in public. It was challenging, demanding precise timing and control. For a moment, he hesitated, remembering the fear of making a mistake. But then he reminded himself why he was here. This was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about expressing himself fully. With determination, he moved into the difficult section, fingers flying over the keys with confidence. The room was silent except for the music. Each note was clear and strong, resonating through the space. The audience was mesmerized. They could feel the emotion in every chord, the passion behind every movement. The young server felt a surge of pride and happiness. He had never imagined that playing the piano in front of others could feel so liberating. Every doubt, every fear, seemed to melt away as the music took over. As the piece reached its climax, the young server poured all of his energy into the performance. The melody swelled, filling the room with a powerful, moving sound. He felt a sense of triumph, not because he had proven anyone wrong, but because he had embraced his true self. The music spoke for him, conveying feelings that words could not. He could see the astonishment in the eyes of the audience, the expressions of people who had never expected this level of talent from someone they had dismissed. When the final note lingered and faded, the room was silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder and louder. The young server looked up, and for the first time, he saw genuine admiration in the faces around him. People were clapping, cheering, and even standing to show their appreciation. The earlier whispers of doubt were gone, replaced by excitement and respect. He felt a warmth in his chest, a mix of relief and happiness that he had never experienced before. Some of the guests approached him after the performance, complimenting him on his skill and expressing how moved they were by the music. Even a few of his co-workers, who had been skeptical before, nodded in acknowledgement, unable to hide their surprise. The young server smiled, feeling a sense of belonging and recognition that he had longed for. It was not about proving anyone wrong, but about being seen for who he truly was. As he returned to his station, he realized that something inside him had changed. The performance had given him confidence and courage, a reminder that he had a unique talent that deserved to be shared. He also understood that the opinions of others could no longer hold him back. He had faced fear, embraced his passion, and created a moment that would stay with him forever. The music had become a part of him, stronger and more alive than ever, and he knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The applause from the audience still echoed in the young server's ears as he sat back down at his station. His hands were slightly trembling, but it was not fear anymore. It was excitement and adrenaline. He felt a warmth spreading through him, a happiness that he had rarely experienced in his life. For the first time, he realized that he had made a connection with people beyond the walls of the restaurant, through something pure and personal: music. Guests continued to murmur among themselves, replaying the performance in their minds. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotion in the melody. Others whispered to each other about how surprised they were by the server's talent. It was no longer a joke or a dare. It had become a real display of skill, emotion, and courage. He noticed a few people approaching him, asking questions about how long he had been playing and praising the way he made the piano sound alive. The compliments were overwhelming but joyful. He had always feared recognition, worried it might be too much, too fast, but now he welcomed it with a shy smile. He glanced toward his coworkers. Some looked embarrassed, others impressed. One of them gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a silent apology for the mocking words spoken earlier. The young server didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him, and he had no intention of lowering himself to arguing or justifying his talent. Instead, he felt proud of himself in a quiet way, knowing that he had embraced his true passion and shared it with the world. The rest of the talent night continued, but the energy in the room had changed. People were more attentive, more respectful. The audience seemed to have a renewed excitement, waiting to see what would come next, but with a new understanding. Anyone could surprise them. The young server felt a sense of calm settle over him, a rare feeling after the storm of nerves and adrenaline. He realized that this night had given him more than applause. It had given him confidence and courage, a sense of belonging that went beyond his role in the restaurant. He thought back to all the times he had hidden his talent, afraid of judgment or ridicule. Every night he spent practicing in secret now seemed worth it. All the small moments of joy, the music that had carried him through lonely nights, had prepared him for this moment. He understood something important now. Hiding his talent had not protected him. It had limited him. By embracing it, he had opened a door to new possibilities. He knew that from this day on, he could never go back to seeing himself as just a server. He was more, and he had proven it to himself. As the evening went on, the server received more attention from the guests. Some were curious about his story, how a young server could play the piano with such skill and emotion. Others asked if he had performed publicly before, surprised that this was his first time. He answered politely but briefly, enjoying the attention without becoming boastful. There was a satisfaction in knowing that his music, not his words, had captured the audience. He felt connected not just to the crowd but to himself. For years, he had kept a part of himself hidden, afraid to let anyone see it. Now it was out in the open and it felt freeing. During a short break, he went to the back of the restaurant to grab a drink. His legs were slightly sore from standing all evening, but he didn't mind. His mind was buzzing with thoughts and emotions. He replayed the performance in his head, remembering each note, each chord, each moment when he had felt the music flowing through him. He smiled quietly to himself, feeling proud and content. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like his talent had value beyond his own private satisfaction. The organizers of the talent night approached him, expressing their admiration and gratitude for his performance. They asked if he would consider performing at future events or even joining a local music group. His heart leapt at the idea, a mixture of excitement and disbelief. He had never imagined that this small step, this act of bravery, could lead to real opportunities. He realized that his life might be about to change in ways he had never dreamed possible. Back at his station, he noticed a few regular guests who had always been kind to him, nodding with encouragement. They looked proud and happy for him, sharing smiles and gentle applause. It was a feeling unlike any other, a quiet acknowledgement that he had worked hard and was finally being seen for more than his daily job. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the applause, but for the recognition that talent, dedication, and courage could be noticed, even in the smallest moments. As the night drew to a close, the server reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From long nights practicing alone to the small doubts whispered by coworkers, every challenge had shaped him, preparing him for this moment. The experience had taught him that fear and judgment were part of life, but they should never hold him back from pursuing what he loved. Music had given him strength, confidence, and a way to connect with others. It had reminded him that his worth was not defined by what others thought, but by the passion and dedication he brought to his craft. Walking home later that evening, he felt lighter than he had in years. The streets were quiet, the world calm and still. He replayed the performance again in his mind, savoring each note and the way the audience had reacted. He thought about the possibilities ahead, the new doors that might open, and the ways his life could change if he continued to follow his passion. For the first time, he felt a true sense of hope and excitement for the future. He knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would lead him to places he had only dreamed of before. That night, as he finally lay down to sleep, he felt a quiet pride that warmed him from the inside out. He had faced his fears, embraced his talent, and shared a piece of his soul with others. The young server who had once hidden behind his apron, unnoticed and underestimated, had become someone who could inspire, captivate, and connect through music. The experience had not only changed the way others saw him, but more importantly, it had changed the way he saw himself. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew deep in his heart that the piano would always be his true companion, guiding him through life, one note at a time. The young server arrived at the restaurant the next morning with a feeling of quiet anticipation. The memory of the previous night's performance still lingered, filling him with both excitement and nervous energy. The applause, the smiles, the way the audience had been captivated. It was all fresh in his mind. He felt different somehow, lighter and more confident. But there was also a new pressure. Everyone now expected something more, something extraordinary, and he was unsure if he could meet that expectation. As he went about his morning duties, delivering coffee and clearing tables, he noticed that some of the regular customers were already talking about him. A few smiled knowingly when they saw him, whispering to each other about the piano performance. Some co-workers were quieter than usual, glancing at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Pride, surprise, maybe a little guilt for doubting him. It was strange to feel noticed, to feel the weight of other people's attention after years of blending into the background. During a short break, he went to the piano in the corner of the restaurant. It sat silently, waiting for him, familiar and comforting. He ran his fingers across the keys, feeling the grooves and the smoothness under his touch. The music called to him as it always did, but this time it was different. There was a sense of purpose, a desire to explore his abilities further and see how far he could go. He remembered the challenging section he had played the night before, how his fingers had moved almost instinctively over the keys. That feeling had been exhilarating, and he wanted more. When the lunch crowd arrived, the energy in the restaurant was high. People were chatting, laughing, and enjoying their meals, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. Some were eager to see if he would play again. A few even asked casually if they might hear another performance today. The young server felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had discovered a new side of himself, but he also realized that music carried responsibility. People had expectations now, and he wanted to honor that without losing the authenticity of his performance. Later in the afternoon, the restaurant manager approached him with an unexpected suggestion. There was going to be a small charity event in the evening, and they needed a performer for the piano. The manager looked at him with hope and a hint of excitement, clearly remembering his performance from the night before. The young server's heart raced. This was a bigger audience and the stakes felt higher. He hesitated, thinking of the pressure, but then remembered the joy and freedom he had felt while playing last night. This was another opportunity to share his music, to connect with people, and to challenge himself. He nodded quietly, agreeing to perform. Throughout the day, he practiced in short bursts whenever he could. He ran through melodies he knew well and experimented with new arrangements, feeling the music flow through him in ways it never had before. Each note, each chord, each pause was deliberate, a reflection of his growing confidence and skill. He felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that he was not only playing music but creating an experience for those who would listen. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a part of him, a voice for the emotions he often kept hidden. When the evening arrived, the charity event was in full swing. The room was larger than the restaurant had been the night before, with more guests and a sense of formality that made him slightly anxious. Tables were arranged neatly, and a small stage had been set up at the front. The lights were soft but bright enough to highlight the piano, and the audience settled in with anticipation. He could feel their eyes on him as he approached the stage, and for a moment, the nervousness returned. But then he remembered the music, the feeling of freedom and expression that had carried him before. He sat down, adjusted the bench, and let his fingers hover above the keys. The first notes he played were gentle, testing the acoustics of the room and the attention of the audience. A hush fell over the crowd, and he could feel their curiosity. He began to play more confidently, letting the melody rise and fall naturally. The music filled the room, creating a connection between him and the audience that was both powerful and intimate. He noticed expressions of surprise, delight, and admiration on the faces of the guests. Even those who had been skeptical were leaning forward, captivated by the sound and emotion he was producing. As he continued, he pushed himself further than he had before. He introduced more complex patterns, daring transitions, and emotional swells that carried the audience along with him. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. The music was no longer just a performance. It was a story, a journey that he shared with everyone in the room. He felt completely immersed, his mind focused entirely on the melody, the rhythm, and the connection he was creating. The nervousness had vanished, replaced by a deep sense of purpose and joy. Midway through the piece, he hit a particularly challenging section that required precise timing and strong control. He had practiced this part countless times in private, but performing it live was a different experience. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then let his fingers move with confidence. The notes flowed seamlessly, each one clear and expressive. He felt a surge of triumph, not because he was showing off his skill, but because he had overcome the fear that had held him back for so long. The audience responded immediately, leaning in, captivated by the technical mastery and emotional depth of the performance. When he finished the piece, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then the applause erupted, louder and more enthusiastic than anything he had experienced before. Guests were standing, clapping, and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The young server felt a rush of pride, happiness, and relief. He had shared a piece of himself, and it had been received with admiration and appreciation. For the first time, he truly understood the power of music to move people, to create connections, and to inspire. After the performance, several guests approached him, expressing their amazement and gratitude. They asked about his background, how long he had been playing, and if he had considered performing professionally. The young server answered humbly but with confidence, sharing a little of his story without feeling the need to justify himself. The reactions were overwhelmingly positive, and he realized that people valued authenticity and passion more than anything else. His music had spoken for him, and it had been enough. As the night came to a close, he sat quietly at the piano, letting the final echoes of the performance linger in the room. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had taken a risk and embraced his true self. The experience had shown him that fear and doubt could be overcome, that hidden talent could be revealed, and that sharing his passion could bring joy not only to himself but to others as well. He understood that this was just the beginning of a journey, one that would continue to challenge him, inspire him, and allow him to grow in ways he had never imagined. Walking home later that night, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The streets were quiet, the world calm and still. He replayed the evening in his mind, savoring each moment, each note, each reaction from the audience. He thought about the possibilities ahead, the new doors that might open, and the opportunities to continue sharing his music. For the first time, he felt truly empowered, confident that he could face any challenge and embrace his talents fully. He knew that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but he also knew that he had discovered a strength within himself that could carry him through anything. As he finally rested that night, he felt a quiet satisfaction that warmed him deeply. He had faced fear, embraced his passion, and shared a part of himself that had long been hidden. The young server who had once been overlooked and underestimated had now stepped into a space where his talent was recognized and celebrated. He understood that this was not just about applause or recognition, but about discovering who he truly was and embracing it fully. And with that realization, he drifted off to sleep, dreaming of melodies yet to be played and stories yet to be told, ready to continue the journey that music had opened for him. The young server arrived at the restaurant the next evening with a mix of excitement and calm determination. The previous night's performance had been a revelation for him, a moment when he had discovered the full power of his talent. Now, as he prepared for another round of music, he felt a sense of anticipation but also a quiet confidence. He had experienced what it felt like to captivate an audience, and that memory strengthened him from within. As he walked past the tables, he noticed the guests already settling in, eager to see him perform. Some of them smiled, a knowing glance or nod acknowledging the experience they had witnessed before. There was a sense of respect in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that this server was more than his uniform suggested. He moved about his duties efficiently, but his mind was partly on the music to come, mentally preparing for the performance. He knew this time it would not just be a casual display. It was an opportunity to share the depth of his emotions and skill. When the evening began, he approached the piano as the audience's chatter softened. The room seemed larger than before, filled with anticipation. He adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes rang out softly, drawing the audience's attention immediately. The familiar feeling of focus and immersion returned, his nerves melting away as the music began to flow. Every note was deliberate, every movement filled with intention and emotion. He felt the connection forming between him and those listening, a bond created through the universal language of music. As he continued, he allowed himself to explore more complex melodies. He weaved in variations, experimenting with tempo and intensity. The audience leaned in, mesmerized by the depth and emotion of his playing. Their earlier respect had transformed into admiration, and he could sense that the room was fully captivated. Each chord carried a story, each melody a feeling that reached into the hearts of the listeners. He felt as though he was not only performing for them but with them, sharing a moment of human connection that transcended words. Midway through the performance, he noticed a few guests with tears in their eyes. The emotions stirred within him as well. He had always played music privately, for himself, but now he realized the power it had to touch others. It was not just skill that moved people. It was the authenticity, the raw expression of feeling. He embraced this realization fully, letting his heart guide his fingers. The melody became richer, deeper, flowing effortlessly from his imagination and memory, each note a reflection of the journey that had brought him here. Some of his co-workers, who had been skeptical before, watched with astonishment. Their earlier jokes and doubts were replaced by silent acknowledgement and even a hint of admiration. They realized that the quiet server they had underestimated held a talent that went far beyond their expectations. But he did not seek to prove them wrong. He played for himself, for the music, and for the audience who was now completely absorbed. The applause that had come in small waves before now seemed inevitable, a growing energy in the room as the performance built toward its climax. The final part of the piece was the most demanding. He had carefully chosen a composition that would challenge him but also showcase the depth of his expression. His fingers moved with precision, yet with emotion that made the music feel alive. Every chord, every note was a statement of who he was. He felt a surge of triumph. Not pride in showing off, but pride in embracing his full potential and allowing himself to shine. The audience responded instantly, leaning forward, silent for a moment in awe, then erupting into spontaneous applause and cheers. The standing ovation took him by surprise. People were clapping, shouting words of encouragement, and some were even on their feet. The young server felt a rush of joy, relief, and gratitude all at once. The performance had not only demonstrated his talent, but had revealed a part of himself that he had long kept hidden. He looked around at the faces of those who had doubted him, those who had whispered or joked, and he felt a quiet sense of vindication, but it was not about revenge. It was about recognition and validation of the gift he had nurtured in silence for so long. After the applause settled, several guests approached him to express their amazement. They spoke of how moving the music had been, how it had touched them personally, and how unexpected it was to see such talent from someone in his position. He listened humbly, grateful for their appreciation, but he also felt a growing sense of self-worth. He realized that the experience had changed him, giving him a newfound confidence that would carry forward. The music had allowed him to step into his own light, to be seen and heard as the person he truly was. Even some of his co-workers approached him, this time with genuine respect and curiosity. One quietly admitted that they had underestimated him, while another simply smiled and nodded in approval. The young server did not dwell on past doubts. He acknowledged them with a polite smile and continued focusing on the positive impact he had created. It was clear that his journey had inspired others, showing that hidden talent, when embraced fully, could move and impress even the most skeptical of observers. The evening wound down, but the impression he had left lingered. Guests left the restaurant talking excitedly about the performance, sharing stories of the captivating piano solo, and expressing interest in seeing him play again. The young server returned to his duties with a quiet pride, knowing that he had created a lasting memory for those present. He felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause. It was the deep satisfaction of knowing he had shared a part of himself, something genuine and meaningful, with others. As he closed the restaurant later that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the quiet nights of secret practice to the hesitant first steps onto the stage, every moment had contributed to this transformation. The music had not only revealed his talent but had strengthened his confidence, taught him the value of authenticity, and shown him the joy of connecting with others through art. He understood that his life was no longer limited to the role of a server. He had discovered a path that could take him far beyond what he had imagined. Walking home under the quiet night sky, he felt a deep sense of peace. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, reflecting the inner light he now carried. He replayed the performance in his mind, savoring every note, every expression, every reaction from the audience. It was a moment that would stay with him forever, a turning point in his life where fear and doubt were replaced by confidence, courage, and self-belief. The young server who had once been shamed, underestimated, and overlooked had now found his voice, and it was beautiful, powerful, and undeniable. That night, as he lay in bed, he felt a quiet gratitude for the journey and the opportunities that had come his way. He had faced challenges, embraced his passion, and allowed himself to be seen in a way that he had never thought possible. The music had become more than a talent. It was a part of his identity, a bridge to others, and a source of joy and inspiration. He knew that this was not the end but the beginning of something much greater. And as he drifted off to sleep, he dreamed of the melodies yet to come, the performances yet to be shared, and the endless possibilities that lay ahead, ready to embrace each note with courage and heart. The following morning, the young server woke up with a sense of anticipation and calm excitement. The previous evening had been one of the most remarkable experiences of his life. He had faced fear, embraced his talent, and captivated a room full of people. But now, as he prepared for the day, he felt the weight of something new, a realization that this was only the beginning of his journey. As he arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was different. Guests greeted him with smiles and warm recognition. Some of the regulars who had once treated him as just another server now looked at him with curiosity and admiration. He noticed the subtle changes in his co-workers' attitudes too. A few who had doubted him before now gave small nods or offered encouraging words. It was clear that the performance had left an impression, and he felt a quiet sense of pride mixed with humility. Throughout the day, he moved about his duties with ease, carrying trays and taking orders, yet his mind often drifted back to the piano. He imagined melodies he wanted to try, new arrangements, and the feeling of performing in front of others. It was no longer a secret desire or a hidden talent. It had become a part of his identity. Music had always been his refuge, but now it was also a bridge to the world outside, a way to connect, inspire, and express himself fully. By evening, the restaurant was buzzing with more energy than usual. Word of his talent had spread, and a small crowd had gathered, some arriving early to ensure they had a good view. The young server felt a mixture of excitement and nerves as he approached the piano. This time, it wasn't just a casual performance. It was an opportunity to show how far he had come, to embrace his music without hesitation or fear. He adjusted the bench, placed his fingers on the keys and took a deep, steadying breath. The first notes rang out softly, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He let the melody flow naturally, fingers moving with precision and emotion. The audience was silent, completely absorbed by the music. Each chord, each delicate transition, spoke of the dedication, practice, and love he had poured into his craft. He noticed subtle expressions of surprise and admiration, eyes widening as the melodies unfolded. The young server felt a deep connection with the crowd, a shared experience that transcended words and gestures. As he continued, he allowed himself to explore the music even more boldly. He introduced variations, shifting tempos, and expressive pauses that heightened the emotional impact. His fingers danced over the keys effortlessly, creating patterns that were both complex and beautiful. The audience was mesmerized, hanging on each note, reacting to the music with awe and appreciation. It was as if time had stopped, and the room existed solely in the space between his fingers and the resonating notes. Midway through the performance, he reached the most challenging section of the piece. This part demanded complete focus, technical precision, and emotional depth. His heart raced, but he welcomed the challenge. Years of practice, dedication, and quiet determination had prepared him for this moment. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the rhythm in his mind, and then let his fingers take control. The music flowed seamlessly, powerful yet delicate, and the audience responded instinctively, drawn in by the skill and passion he displayed. When he reached the final notes, he allowed them to linger, creating a moment of stillness that filled the room. The silence was profound, as if everyone was holding their breath, savoring the final expression of the music. Then the applause began, soft at first, then swelling into a thunderous wave of appreciation. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and shouting words of admiration. The young server felt an overwhelming mixture of joy, relief, and gratitude. He had not only shared his talent but had touched the hearts of everyone present. After the performance, several people approached him, expressing their amazement and gratitude. They asked how long he had been playing, whether he had considered performing professionally, and how he had found the courage to play in front of others. The young server answered with humility, sharing a little of his journey without boasting. He realized that his story, combined with his music, had inspired people, showing that dedication and passion could overcome fear and doubt. Some of his co-workers, now fully respectful, congratulated him and expressed their admiration. A few even admitted that they had been wrong to doubt him. The young server smiled politely, feeling no need for vindication. He understood that his journey was not about proving others wrong but about embracing who he truly was. The recognition he received was secondary to the joy and freedom he felt in expressing his music. The evening ended on a high note, with guests leaving the restaurant full of admiration and excitement. The young server returned to his duties with a sense of fulfillment and peace. He knew that this experience had changed him in a fundamental way. He had discovered the courage to embrace his passion, the power to connect with others through art, and the importance of staying true to himself despite fear and judgment. Walking home later, he reflected on the transformation he had experienced. The quiet nights of practice, the moments of doubt, the fear of being judged, all had led him to this point. He realized that talent and passion were not enough. They had to be nurtured with courage and commitment. Music had given him not only a voice but also a sense of identity and purpose. It had shown him that even someone overlooked and underestimated could shine brilliantly when given the chance. As he lay down to sleep that night, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and hope. He had faced fear, embraced his talent, and shared a part of himself with the world. The young server who had once been shamed and underestimated had now become someone capable of inspiring, captivating, and connecting with others. The experience had taught him that self-belief, dedication, and courage could transform not only his life but the lives of those around him. He dreamed of future performances, of new melodies and compositions, and of opportunities to share his music even further. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew that he was ready to face them. His journey had only just begun, and the piano would always be his companion, guiding him, inspiring him, and allowing him to express the deepest parts of his soul. And with that thought, he drifted into a peaceful sleep, confident, hopeful, and ready for the new chapter that awaited him.